Dear brothers and sisters in Christ, the more excuses one comes up with or one gives for one's sins, the more dangerous that person becomes, or more self-destructive that person becomes. Not only that, that person could also become very violent and very destructive for other people also. And he or she is going to affect other people's lives negatively and destructively. In fact, if you read the first letter to Timothy by St. Paul, there is a passage like this, very interesting. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 22. The second part of that verse, it says, "No participate in another man's sins." Or you could say, "Do not participate in another man's sin. Keep yourself pure." Keep yourself pure. Now, with regard to this teaching also, the Catholic Church has developed a tradition with the help of great theologians down through the centuries about how one could become accessory to another's sin, or how we could become knowingly or unknowingly part of the sins of another person. This is very important because this is also very common nowadays, because justification of sin has become one of the dominant characteristics of modern era. The denial of sin is very common. It's as wide as the air we breathe, you see. Therefore, we need to recognize this teaching properly and then examine our conscience whether we had also committed such actions of cooperation and collaboration. So there are church teachers, there are 9 ways of being accessory to another's sin, or 9 ways of becoming part of another person's sin. Number 1 is by counsel. Of course, you don't commit the sin, but you kind of encourage, you give counsels, you guide him. You say, very good, this is how you should do. There are examples in human history who did, people who did such and such a thing, etc. So by counsel, by advisors, we could become part of, or we could become a collaborator of another's sins. So we have to be very careful. We have to examine our conscience whether we have done this, at times knowingly, at times unknowingly. Nevertheless, there is no excuse for that. So that's number 1, by counsel. Number 2, by command. Especially if you are in an position of authority. Let's say you are the head of that group, or that company, or that office, and you give a command to one of your workers who is working under him to do something sinful, or to tell a lie, for an example. You tell him, when let's say there was a telephone call, and the boss will tell you, tell that person I'm not here, or I am out. You see, that boss or that head of that place command that person to tell a lie. Or let's say another person, let's say a father in the family is saying one of his sons, it's okay if you drink, no problem. If you try marijuana or drugs once in a while, it's okay. Anyway, you are a man now. Or it's all right if you go to a prostituted woman, no problem, That's being a real man. You have to experience these things, Of course, that child, that young boy, that young man, because of his fear of that authority, once head of the office, or one's father, or one's teacher, or one's principal, cannot say no and simply commit that. You see, that is also a serious problem then. Then that person had, that head of the office, or that authority figure, that parent had participated in that action. He had commanded that person to commit that sin. So we have to be very careful. We should use our authority not to convince people to sin, but to rescue people from sins, to make people holier, to make people's lives pleasing to God, not abuse our authority or our power in terms of misguiding people, misleading people. That's a serious violation, and we have to be answerable to that. That's number 3. Number 2. Number 3 is by consent. You give the agreement. You don't commit it, but you kind of implicitly give the agreement. You give your consent for that. You know, most of the time it can happen like, let's say there is a kind of a fight, a physical confrontation between two men, and let's say one of the wives of those men who are fighting is kind of agreeing with the husband. So the wife wants husband to beat the other person. You know, she's giving her full consent to that. Instead of trying to solve the problem, trying to pacify the two parties, you are in agreement with that. You are giving your consent to that. That can happen in many situations in life, you see. In our families it can happen, in our working place, in our schools, in other institutions, etc. These things can happen under any circumstances. Under all situations, such things could occur, right? That's number 3, by consent. Number 4 is by provocation. You provoke that person. You kind of encourage that person, let's say, to beat another one, or to steal something. You see, you keep provoking that person. So we have to be careful. Sometimes we have done such things, you know. By provocation, we have participated in the sin of another person. So examine your conscience and see whether you have also been involved in similar things in the past. Number 5, by praise or by flattery. You kind of praise that action, you know, or by flattery. You flatter that person or that action, that sinful thing. Let's say it was a murder, right? And then you really kind of appreciate, you really praise it, you give all sorts of reasons, and you glorify it. It could also happen as the glorification of violence. Yeah. Sometime under certain circumstances, like a situation of war, maybe it could not be avoided. It was unavoidable, let's say, a little bit using force to stop certain things. But you can never glorify violence. We should always think, and we should always in the opinion that we should wish there were other means of solving the problems, other than the violent means, you see. Therefore, there is no glorification of violence whatsoever. Because those people, let's say, who got killed or who got injured, are also children of God. We should wish always that there would be alternative ways of dealing with conflicts and situations of tensions and violence. So by phrase or by flattery, we should not be participating in the sins of other people. We must always wish there were possible alternatives. Number 6, by concealment. You conceal it, you hide it. Hiding can happen in a subtle manner, and also it could happen in a more organized, planned manner. You are trying to conceal the sin or the act of sin by trying to come up with all sorts of means. Sometimes one could use one's authority, one could use one's power, one could use one's resources like money and connections, and also one's influence to conceal the crime or that grave sin or that great damage done to another person, you see. So if you have been doing that, if you have been trying to conceal the sins of other people, you have directly participated in the sin. And the next is, number 7 is, by partaking, you become part of it. You actually collaborate directly. Let's say someone is going to kill someone. You will provide that person with a knife, or you will provide that person with a kind of a metal stick. Or it had happened, even in United States, it happened that one father had bought a gun for one of his sons, and by using that gun, he killed another person. That child killed another person, you see. So unless those children are mature enough to handle those things, you have to be careful. Then you have directly participated in the crime or in that sinful act by providing that person with material instruments or other facilities. Or you allow him to, when he, let's say, when he returned from killing a person, after killing a person, you gave him accommodation, etc. You see, there can be thousands of ways of participating in another's crime. And number 8 is, by silence. We do this more often than not. We know who did it, we know there is a problem, but we keep silent about it. Even when it comes to small things like, let's say, this had happened many times in many places, like let's say 2 people are going to get married, and this man is a married person. He had been married, he had some children, not in the same area, not in the same village, but somewhere else, or in another country, but you you remain silent about it. You know it as a fact, but you are not saying a word about it. Not as a gossip, but you have a duty, an obligation to inform that party, especially that innocent woman, innocent young girl about it. But this had happened in many places, I know. They remain silent, they keep silent. So we could participate in another sin by remaining silent about it. Of course, that man is committing a sin. He is a married person, he has a family, and he is concealing it and then trying to marry another person. And we collaborate in that sin. Even though we know it, we don't say anything. Or any other defect that person has, any other, let's say, a hindrance to live a married life, but we know that, but we are concealing. It's a serious sin. And we have participated in that sinful situation. That's number 8, by silence, which is very common, which is very rampant. Last, number 9 is by defense of the ill done. We try to defend it. We try to come up with all sorts of arguments, very smart reasons, all sorts of justifications. This could also happen in a court of law. Actually, the teaching of the church is very clear. Even for lawyers, if that lawyer knows that person really committed a murder, that he is really a murderer, he has all the evidences, he or she should not be defending that person in a court of law, because this person is guilty of a murder. So how could you cooperate, or how could you help that person to get to free that person. So if one has a conscience, even as a, let's say, a legal expert, one should be faithful to one's conscience. One could say, well, you better look for another one. I will not be able to help you out. Yeah. So you see, one should always be faithful to one's innermost voice. If not, knowingly you are collaborating in the sin of another person. You see, not only in the legal profession, but we also do it in our day-to-day life. We sometimes write articles about the sins of some other people and justifying it, or kind of trying to whitewash these things. So we need to be very careful. It's not enough that we do not sin, or it's not enough that we are trying to live holy lives, you see, righteous lives, and lives that are pleasing to God. That's a very good attempt. That's something that should be appreciated. But we must not also cooperate or collaborate or participate in the sinful actions of other people. So I will summarize again those 9 ways of being accessory to another's sins. Number 1 again is by counsel. Number 2, by command. Number 3, by consent. Number 4, by provocation. Number 5, by praise or by flattery. Number 6, by concealment. Number 7, by partaking of it or in it. Number 8, by silence. Number 10, by the defense of ill or the wrong or the sin done. So if you feel at times without knowing, or sometimes you were helpless, you had collaborated in these ways, now is the time for you to become honest about it. If you feel helpless when you face some situations like these, you need to ask the help of God, the grace of God to stand by your own convictions and not to collaborate in, not to participate in someone else's sin. Yeah, we need the grace of God for that. Sometimes, there are situations, of course, especially when we live in society, when we work in an office, when we live with other people. Of course, there are situations where we become helpless, we become powerless. We feel we can't do anything, we cannot resist, we cannot say no to these sinful requests. Of course, that's natural. In the modern world, we face more and more such situations. Because you see, the modern world is very much into sinful actions, sinful activities. There are thousands of justifications for sins. Millions of excuses in the modern world. In fact, one pope, if I am not mistaken, Pope Pius XII said famously, the sin of the century is the lack of sense of sin. People have lost any sense of sin. Sin has become the norm, the normal thing. You see, it's like to be human is to commit sin, something like that. If you don't commit sins, as if there is something wrong with you, as if you are not really human, as if you are not a real man, you are not a really boy or a young person. In fact, the more sins you commit, the more people will appreciate you. You become a hero in the modern world. Like for an example, if a young man has only one girlfriend, you see, most of the time he will get ridiculed. He's not a real man. If he has so many girlfriends, he's a hero. He's a real man. He's real macho. Right? He's a model for everybody else. If a young man does not drink and smoke, other people will ridicule him, as if there is something wrong with his humanity, something wrong with his manhood. You see? In fact, Real men do not drink, real men do not smoke. They don't need it. They have a sense of who they are. They don't have any low self-esteem. They are not full of self-pity. So they could survive without doing these things. So true men, real men don't smoke, don't drink. That's not necessary. You are not going to lose anything. There will not be any lack of, your manhood. But the modern world, we would say, of course, if you do not do these things, there is seriously something wrong with you. Or if a husband is very loyal and faithful to his wife, people will ridicule in the modern world. If he has no, extramarital affairs, if he has no sidelines, and other women, he is not considered as a real husband, real man, real male. So now you could see how distorted our world has become, how sick our world has become. So therefore, we have to have courage. We have to have magnanimity and inner strength to go against these tendencies and to remain holy. Now, it doesn't mean, this is not another thing we have to understand. This does not mean, we have to we have to maintain kind of pride, or we have to think we are superior to others, we are better than others. No, or we should not look at them, or we should not put them down. Right? It's not the purpose here. It's not kind of self-righteousness. We are better, holier, more righteous than others. No. That is in order to serve other people. That is in order to save humanity. In order to help other people. In order to save humanity. In order to save this world. In order to collaborate with Jesus' work of salvation, we need to maintain certain level of personal integrity, personal holiness. If not, what will happen? We increase the sinful tendencies in the world. We have also contributed to the sin in the world, the collective sin in the world we have committed by our small actions. Then we become part of the problem. We should never become part of the problem. We should become part of the solution in the world. When we sin, what will happen? We are contributing to the evil in the world, the injustices in the world, and other problems in the world. We should never collaborate to the darkness in the world, to the injustices in the world, and to the evil powers in the world. We should be able to resist in God, in Christ. So that's the purpose, not to claim any superiority or moral superiority over other people, or to maintain a certain spiritual pride. No. That is to serve. So, in other words, to remain sinless or to remain holy is an act of love, is an act of unconditional love. Because when we commit sins, we are not capable of loving other people. When we commit sins, we are not capable of helping other people out. Like for an example, someone who smokes or someone who drinks. If that person stops it, he can save that money and feed some hungry people. More and more people in the world are becoming hungry. So he can save money from his smoking, from his drinking, from his drugs, or from his marijuana factories, and then save those money, and then help poor people out. Therefore, living a holy life is an act of love. We become capable of loving other people. Even though we may be kind-hearted. I'm not saying people who commit sins are bad people, or they are evil people, or they don't know how to love, but they could love more. Because in order to love, we need to do a lot of sacrifices. So then, if let's say that person will decide, okay, the money I spend for my drinks, for my alcohol, I will donate to poor people. The money I will spend for gambling, I will donate to poor people. The money I have spent so far for smoking and other things, I will donate to really people who are struggling, you see. Then it becomes really an act of love. Self-sacrificial love. Love is always sacrificial. You know, you cannot have your own thing. You enjoy a very luxurious life at the same time helping other people. You could also do that, but there is no sacrifice involved. True love involves self-sacrifice. True love is truly self-donation, self-surrender. You give something of yourself, something very important to you, something precious to you, you also give. You donate it unto other people. So when it comes to that love, Christ is our model. Christ is our really role model. Self-sacrificing love is the norm for any healthy human life. So therefore, when we sin, we become unable to love truly. That is why we need to live a holy life. Then our capacity to help other people become bigger, larger and greater. Because you are sacrificing one thing in order to benefit another person, in order to help another person out. So that is the nature of holiness. So that is why we need to avoid sin, so that we become capable of helping other people, we become capable of loving other people, we become capable of making this world a better place, bit more a human place, a bit more a meaningful place. So that's the purpose. Not any other's feeling of self-righteousness or feeling of moral or spiritual superiority, no. So it's an act of true humility, in other words. Struggling against sin is an act of deep humility. So think about these things, reflect about these things. They will help you tremendously, and start living your life like that. Start living a new life, a new existence. Then you become a blessing unto whole humanity. You become a great role model for everybody. Thank you very much. May God bless you all.